There was a woman named Esther who had spent a long time feeling like something in her life was missing, but she could not always explain exactly what it was. Some days she felt it was money. Some days she felt it was peace. Some days she felt it was strength. Some days she felt it was direction. She prayed often, and each prayer sounded a little different because each day brought a different kind of ache. On one day, she would ask God for help with her home. On another day, she would ask for healing in her heart. On another day, she would ask for a way forward when the future looked unclear. She was not confused about her need. She was only tired of carrying it. Esther lived a simple life. She woke up early, helped her family, and did her best to keep things moving. She was faithful in the small things, but inside she often felt as if she was still standing in front of a door that had not opened. The bills were still there. The pressure was still there. The questions were still there. Some people around her seemed to move through life with ease, as if they already knew what to do and where to go. Esther did not feel that way. She often felt behind, not because she lacked effort, but because she did not understand why her journey seemed slower than others. She had a habit of whispering her worries to God in quiet moments. She would stand at the sink, fold clothes, sit on the edge of her bed, or wait in a line and silently ask him to show her what she needed. She did not want only temporary relief. She wanted a real answer. She wanted her life to feel steady again. She wanted to know that the thing she needed was not far away, lost or forgotten. She wanted assurance that heaven had seen her long before she could fully name her own pain. One evening, after a particularly heavy day, Esther sat alone in the living room after everyone had gone to sleep. The house was quiet, and that quiet made her thoughts louder than usual. She began reflecting on the many things she had been asking God for. She wanted provision for her household. She wanted peace in her mind. She wanted a door to open in her work life. She wanted her children to be safe and wise. She wanted to stop feeling like she was always one step away from being overwhelmed. Sitting there in the stillness, she suddenly felt a calm, understanding settle in her heart. What you need has already been named. There was not a voice in the room. It was more like a thought that arrived with peace. She sat very still because the words felt deeper than they sounded. She had been acting as if she needed to invent the answer by her own effort, but now she sensed something different. The need itself was not new to God. The answer was not surprising to him. The blessing she was waiting for was not something he had to search for. It had already been seen, already known, already spoken into existence by his wisdom. That realization changed the way she looked at her life. She began to understand that many of the things she had been calling unknown were not unknown at all. Her need had a name before she cried. Her provision had a name before the pressure came. Her peace had a name before the anxiety rose. Her healing had a name before the wound became loud. Her future had a name before she could see it. This meant she was not waiting for God to figure out what to do. She was learning to step into what had already been prepared. The next morning she woke up with the same responsibilities, but a different spirit. The bills had not disappeared. The children still needed care. The work still required effort. But she no longer felt as alone in the process. She began to think that maybe the waiting was not because heaven was silent. Maybe it was because she was growing into the thing she had been asking for. Maybe the answer had already been named, but she had not yet become ready to carry it fully. The thought gave her peace. She started noticing how often God had already named things in her life without her noticing it. She thought about the times she had been protected from danger she did not even see. She thought about the people who had arrived at just the right moment. She thought about the opportunities that came after she had almost given up. She thought about the strength that showed up on days when she had no strength left of her own. Looking back, she realized that life had not been random. There had been guidance all along. Esther began to see that naming matters. A name gives shape to something. A name makes something known. A name carries meaning. When something is named by God, it is not hidden in confusion. It is held on purpose. This was true for the help she needed, and also for the person she was becoming. God had not only named her need, he had named her next season too. As the days passed, she started responding differently to problems. Before, a problem could make her feel as if everything was collapsing. Now she began to ask what the problem was calling out in her. Was it fear? Was it impatience? Was it the need to trust more deeply? Was it showing her where she needed wisdom? Was it revealing a weakness that had to be healed before the next door opened? She realized that not every struggle is meant to crush a person. Some struggles reveal what needs attention. One afternoon, she received news that unsettled her again. A financial issue came up that might have upset her deeply in the past. For a moment, the old worry rose, but she paused before panic could take over. She remembered the words in her heart. What you need has already been named. That meant the answer did not depend on her fear. It depended on the one who had already seen the need. She took a breath, calmed herself, and began to think with more peace. That did not solve everything instantly, but it kept her from falling into hopelessness. She realized that there is a difference between having a need and being consumed by the need. Everyone has needs, but when a person forgets that God already knows the need, fear begins to rule. Esther had spent too much time looking at what was missing instead of trusting what was already prepared. Now she was learning to live with a different center. She no longer felt that she had to chase every answer with panic. She could wait with trust. This did not mean she became passive. She still worked. She still planned. She still made wise decisions. But she no longer acted as if her future depended only on her own hands. She understood that her role was to walk faithfully, while God's role was to provide what had already been named. That balance brought rest to her spirit. She also began to talk about her journey with her sister, who had been going through her own struggles. Her sister carried a different kind of pressure. She worried about her marriage, her children, and her own health. Esther listened to her and realized that every person is carrying a need that often feels urgent to them. But the need, however different it looks, is never a surprise to God. The help is already named. The healing is already known. The direction is already prepared. This truth became a comfort, not only for Esther, but for those around her. The more she walked in this understanding, the more she saw that waiting is not wasted when it is tied to trust. It becomes a season where the heart learns to rest in what God already knows. Esther had once thought that the silence meant nothing was happening. Now she understood that silence can be the place where trust grows. She no longer measured the care of God by the speed of events. She measured it by the faithfulness that had carried her this far. There was a moment when she sat in church and listened quietly while others sang. A phrase in the message touched her heart. It was about how God names what we cannot yet understand. She thought about her own life again. She thought about the fact that before she knew she needed provision, God knew. Before she knew she needed peace, God knew. Before she knew she needed a new level of strength, God knew. Before she understood the shape of the future, God had already named it. That brought tears to her eyes because it meant she was never walking into the unknown alone. The unknown to her was already known to God. That understanding changed how she prayed. She stopped praying as if she had to persuade God to notice her need. She prayed from a place of trust. She still asked. She still sought. She still cried at times. But her prayers now carried more peace because she trusted that the answer had not been delayed by forgetfulness. It was being prepared in wisdom. She no longer prayed like someone knocking on a door she hoped someone would notice. She prayed like someone talking to the one who had already named the room she would enter. Her children also noticed a change in her. She was calmer. She was less likely to spiral into fear at every problem. She still cared deeply, but she was steadier. This made the home feel safer. Her children did not understand all the spiritual language of what she had learned, but they felt the difference. They saw that she no longer moved as if everything depended on panic. She moved as if God had already spoken over the situation. That peace made her more helpful to them. When they were worried about school, she listened. When they were nervous about the future, she encouraged them. When they made mistakes, she corrected them without crushing them. She was becoming someone who knew that words carry power because God's words carry life. If God names something, then the name is already part of its destiny. This truth helped her speak better words over her home. She began to tell her children not to describe themselves by fear or shame. She told them that what God has prepared for them is already known to Him. She She encouraged them to think of themselves as people still being formed, not people forgotten. She wanted them to grow up understanding that their lives were not random. This wisdom would help them later, just as it helped her now. Esther also noticed how often people around her spoke from lack. They said they were not enough. They said they were always behind. They said they could never catch up. They said life had no good option left for them. She did not judge them, because she knew that pain can make people talk that way. But she also knew that words shape expectations. So she began gently reminding others that God has already seen what they need. The answer is not lost. The help is not unnamed. The path is not invisible to him. One day, her friend Ruth came to visit. Ruth had been under great pressure and seemed exhausted from carrying too much. She poured out her worries in the kitchen while Esther prepared tea. Ruth spoke of money, health, family, and the fear that everything was too much. Esther listened carefully and then shared what she had learned in her own quiet season. She said that sometimes the biggest comfort is knowing that the thing you need is not a surprise to God. It already has a place in his mind. It already has a purpose. It is not floating around in uncertainty. It has been named. Ruth became quiet after hearing that. She said it gave her comfort. Esther was glad because she knew the message was not just for her. It was for anyone who had been living with the feeling that their need was too large, too hidden, too complicated, or too late. The truth was simpler than fear made it seem. God already knows. God already named. God already prepared. That message continued shaping Esther. She became less impatient with her season. She stopped forcing every situation to make sense at once. She understood that when the need is named by God, it does not have to be named again by worry. She did not have to carry her problems as if they were mysteries beyond heaven's reach. She could rest in the knowledge that the answer existed before the burden appeared. Over time, she saw evidence of that in small and meaningful ways. A bill that seemed impossible became manageable. A conversation with a family member brought healing. A job opportunity opened at the right time. Her peace deepened. Her home grew calmer. None of this happened in a flash. It happened like morning light spreading slowly across a room. But it was real. The change was real. One evening she looked back over the years and saw the pattern more clearly. So many times she had thought she was walking through life alone, trying to discover things that God had already known from the start. She had been worrying about future problems before they even arrived. She had been trying to name her own solutions before receiving God's naming of them. Now she saw that one of the deepest forms of trust is to believe that the answer to your need already exists in God's heart before it exists in your hands. This brought a new kind of worship in her life. She began thanking God not only for answers she could see, but for answers already named in heaven. She thanked him for peace she had not yet fully experienced. She thanked him for provision not yet visible. She thanked him for healing in progress. She thanked him for doors not yet open, but already known. She thanked him for the strength she would need later. Gratitude became her way of agreeing with God's naming of her life. She also became more patient with herself. There were days when she still felt weak or overwhelmed. But now she understood that weakness does not mean failure. It may simply mean she is still growing into the answer. The thing you need can already be named and still take time to arrive in visible form. That is not a contradiction. That is the process. She learned not to shame herself for being in the process. This was one of the greatest gifts of her journey. She stopped treating waiting as evidence of being abandoned. She began to treat it as evidence that God's timing had a purpose. The prayer had already reached heaven. The need had already been seen. The answer had already been named. Her task was to trust the process while walking faithfully. She saw this truth reflected in nature too. A seed is named before it becomes a tree. A child is known before they can speak. A path is marked before a traveler sees it. A season is unfolding before the full fruit appears. Everything in creation seemed to remind her that naming comes before full visibility. That gave her courage. The thing God had for her did not need to appear fully formed for it to be real. It only needed to be trusted. Later, when she faced a new challenge, she responded differently than before. Something about her confidence had deepened. She no longer panicked first. She paused. She prayed. She remembered that the need itself was already known. She did what she could do and left the rest to God. That steady rhythm became a new way of life. Her children watched her and learned from her. They saw that a person can be honest about pain without being ruled by it. They saw that faith is not denial. It is trust. It is the decision to live as though God's knowledge is greater than your fear. Esther hoped they would carry this with them into adulthood. She believed it would protect them from panic and help them walk with calm hearts. She also saw how her view of other people changed. Instead of judging those who seemed stuck, she felt compassion. She knew that every person is carrying something that needs naming. Some need peace. Some need rest. Some need courage. Some need direction. Some need healing. Some need provision. Some need forgiveness. Some need a door to open. The beauty of God is that He already knows each need by name. No one has to explain themselves perfectly to Him before He cares. That became a comforting truth for her. The older she got, the more she valued simplicity. She no longer wanted complicated explanations for everything. She wanted the truth she could live by. And the truth she carried was simple enough to hold, even on hard days. What you need has already been named. That meant she did not have to invent hope. She only had to trust the one who had named her future before she could see it. She began writing this truth in a small notebook, along with the dates of prayers answered in quiet ways. Not every answer was dramatic. Some were small. Some were personal. Some were hidden in her own changed attitude. Some were visible in the peace of her family. She wrote them down because she wanted to remember. She wanted to look back and see that God had been faithful in the naming long before the final result appeared. That notebook became a testimony of steady care. One of the final lessons Esther learned was that when God names something, He also prepares the path to it. He does not simply label a need and leave it there. He names the need and then begins to shape the circumstances around it. He prepares people, timings, opportunities, corrections, and protections. He works in ways a person cannot always trace. But the result is that what is needed eventually meets the one who needs it. That gave Esther a deep sense of calm. By then she was no longer the same woman who sat in fear, wondering where her answer was. She had become someone who knew how to wait with trust. She had become someone who understood that heaven's silence is not the same as heaven's absence. She had become someone who knew that if God already named what she needed, then she was not lost. She was being led. Her life remained simple, but it carried a peace that was not simple at all. It was the peace of a heart that had learned to rest in divine knowledge. She did not always know what would happen tomorrow, but she knew that tomorrow was not a surprise to God. She did not always know how the need would be met, but she knew it had already been named. That made all the difference. And so the guidance in her story is clear. Do not let fear rename what God already knows. Do not let delay convince you that the answer is missing. Do not let pressure make you forget that your need has already been seen. The provision, the peace, the healing, the strength, the direction, the door, the help, the mercy, the next step, all of it is already known to God. You are not asking into darkness. You are speaking to one who has already named the answer. That is what Esther learned. That is what made her calmer. That is what lifted the weight from her heart. She stopped chasing what was already in God's sight and began trusting Him to bring it to her at the right time. The need was real, but so was the naming, and the naming came first. So when the pressure rises again, remember this truth. What you need has already been named. The answer is not lost. The peace is not forgotten. The help is not absent. The future is not unknown to God. Walk forward with that faith. Let it steady your heart. Let it shape your prayers. Let it guide your waiting. The thing you need is already in the care of the one who named it before you ever knew to ask.